Chag Kasher v'Sameach, Happy Passover. My name is Rabbi Aaron Schombrun, and I'm speaking to you from the Jersey Shore. We've reached the point in our Seder where we get to a famous teaching from Rabban Gamliel, one of our sages from after the destruction of the Second Temple, and he's talking about the importance of food as symbols. Specifically, he says that there are three things that we need to remember at the Passover Seder in order to have a meaningful experience, in order to make the experience special. It's kind of like when we have an anniversary or a birthday or a get-together, and we have to have a certain food there for the experience to be meaningful, because the food tells us a certain story or has a certain memory. So for Rabban Gamliel, there were three things. You'll forgive the props from my kindergartner. Pesach, the Paschal Lamb. Matzah, the bread of affliction. And Maror, the bitter herbs. And for Evan Gamliel, each one of these things symbolized a part of the Passover story. The Pesach, the Paschal Lamb, symbolized the blood that was put on the doorposts from the lamb that protected the Israelite firstborn. And in the temple times, we had the Pesach sacrifice, the Passover sacrifice of the lamb, to remind ourselves of this. There was the Matzah, the bread of affliction, reminding us of the fact that the children of Israel had to hurry as they were leaving Egypt, and they did their best they could, and the bread didn't have time to rise, the dough didn't have time to rise, and so it became matzah, of course. And the maror, the bitter herbs, reminding us of the bitterness of slavery. And so in general, the question at this point in the Seder is, how do we use foods to tell a story? How do these Passover foods connect to the lessons of Passover and the story of Passover? So, for example, when you think about the lamb and the fact that the blood was a sign of protection, what foods do you find comforting and protecting? When you think about the matzah and the idea that the matzah was something that was eaten in a hurry, what's kind of a quick snack, or what's something that you have to make do with when you're trying to rush out, right? And maror, what are those foods that are really gross and you don't like the taste of, right? Generally, or specifically as it relates to Passover, how do these foods relate to our lives and to the message of moving from slavery to freedom? And maybe it's not just foods, maybe it's symbols in general. Are there symbols in your life that connect to the Passover story and the lessons of Passover? Are there things that remind you of what it means to be free? Are there things that remind you of what it means to be enslaved? And then there's the moment that we find ourselves in right now with this COVID-19 coronavirus, and how do these symbols relate to the moment that we're in? I was thinking about the Pesach, the sacrifice, the hope of being spared the plague that the Israelites experienced. How do we hope for being spared this plague? What are our hopes and prayers right now as this swirls all around us? And then the matzah, food that was eaten in a hurry, making do with what they had. There are so many people who are just making do in terms of food. There are people in extreme straits that have no food, little food. How are we helping them? For those of us who are just inconvenienced at the grocery store or as we celebrate Passover, what are we making do with this year? Maybe for Passover, what kinds of things couldn't we find? And then there's the maror, the bitterness. And the maror is perhaps the most important thing for me to think about in this moment of coronavirus and quarantines and all of the rest. Because we bite into that maror and we remember that we were enslaved, that there were bitter times, that it was terrible. But then we also remember that it was over, that we made it through, that we made it through to the other side, and that even there were moments of sweetness, like when we mixed the maror with the charoset at other points in the Seder. So I want to leave you with that hope, that even when we take that bitterness of the maror, let us remember that we'll make it through this. We'll make it through these moments together. From my family to yours, I wish you a Chag Kasher v'Sameach, a happy and joyous Passover, even if it's a different one for all of us.